Our guest today on the show was born in Minnesota, educated in Louisiana, spent years in Paris working on his writing skills. All that brought him to the state of Arkansas, where he lives and writes on a number of subjects, but perhaps the subject he's most passionate about is this prehistoric critter and resident of Arkansas known as the alligator gar. Mark Spitzer is our guest. His book is Season of the Gar. Mark Spitzer, thanks a lot for coming and talking about the season of the gar here. And I love the book, I got to tell you. I thought it was fascinating. And you get right down to it. I mean, page 2, you've got the picture that probably more people associate with the big, bad alligator gar than any other. And it's laying right there. And you cite it as an inspiration to use. Probably has inspired a lot of people, good or bad, about the alligator gar, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah. You know, for me, I saw that picture as a kid. I was 6 years old. And looking through a fish book, and I saw that fish, and I couldn't believe that we had monsters like that in these American waters. And
fresh water.
Right, yeah. Second largest freshwater fish on the continent.
And it has to make people think, you know, what's going to happen to me if I fall out of a boat? Now I know this is the thing that's waiting for me down there, right?
Yeah, a lot of people talk about that, but recently, you know, we haven't had a lot of gar science until like the last 10 or 20 years. And what we've been finding out is they don't attack people. There's been stories of them attacking people, but there's nothing that's really official. Basically, they don't attack people because they only will bite something that they can swallow. Right. And if they bite something that's larger than they can swallow, they'll hold it for a second and weigh it, and if it's too big, they'll let it out. Yeah. So they don't eat people at all.
You make a good case for that throughout the course of the book, and yet that hasn't stopped us as a general populace from having all sorts of irrational fears of gar and things like that. But let's go back to the beginning. When did you start getting? I assume you were interested in fishing from your youth.
Yeah, I grew up fishing in Minnesota and the Mississippi and lakes up there. Always been interested in fish. Yeah.
And then the gar picture came along, and that kind of set you on a course. I mean, what did you decide at that point when you saw that? I'm going to catch one. I want to learn about them. I want to write about them, or all of the above.
Well, it was always this mythical creature for me because I never saw many when I was growing up in Minnesota. There's not many gar up there, but I went to grad school in 1997. To the University of Louisiana at Lafayette down in the Cajun Swamp in Louisiana, and I was right in the middle of gar country, so I thought, and so I figured it's time for me to like go out and catch some now to learn more about them. So I decided to make it my quest to catch a garfish and research garfish, and that's how I really got into it.
And were you successful? Your first outing, going out to try to catch a gar?
Oh, the first time I went out to catch a gar, this tire repair guy told me where I could catch some. And I went to this bridge that he told me about, and I looked down, and there was a gar swimming right there. So I dropped my worm right in front of it.
Single hook and a worm.
Yeah,
right?
just a little worm. And the thing bit, and I couldn't seal the deal, though. You know,
did he break your leader, or he just couldn't be hooked?
Yeah, just couldn't be hooked. You know, they have these really bony mouths. It's really hard to get them with a hook. Yeah.
They wear like a suit of armor, basically, right? I mean, the scales are almost impenetrable, and the inside of the mouth is all teeth and hard plate and so forth.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Their scales are covered with dentine, which is what our teeth are made out of. And so when the French explorers came over in the 1700s, they were calling this fish le poisson armé, or probably bad pronunciation, but the armored fish. They would shoot musket balls at them, and the musket balls would bounce off. Yeah.
And you know, I guess that was probably the start of all the bad publicity that the alligator gar has had through the years, at least among Western folks and non-native folks. And I mean, it really is. I mean, there's always. Most societies, I guess, have a myth of some sort of devilfish or sea monster or something like that. That's, for Middle America, that's our devilfish right there, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
It always has been.
It's really villainized, demonized fish, and people have, become to hate these fish through the centuries because of all this propaganda about them. The actual propaganda that has been spread by state agencies in the South, usually Louisiana, Texas, in the 20s and 30s. They were putting out pamphlets saying, if you catch these fish, kill them, don't return them to the water. They were just ugly looking, scary fish, and basically the settlers wanted to get rid of them.
But it was like there was no basis, in fact, for killing these fish, because their side of the argument was that they kill all our favorite sport fish and food fish, and the book points out that's not the case, right?
Yeah, that's true. Alligator gars, which are the largest of the species, they can get 10, 11 feet long. They eat mostly big minnows, carp, drum, buffalo, shad, and these are the fish that actually go around and wreck other nests of other fish. So, actually, the more alligator gar you take out of a river system, the more big minnows you're going to have, and the less large you're going to have less large game fish.
So they'll eat bass fry and crappie fry and all the other things. They're just not lovable to look at. I mean, to you maybe.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, the average person sees this prehistoric thing that's been on the planet for what, 200 million years? It's pre-Jurassic period.
Oh yeah, they've been here since before the dinosaurs.
Before the dinosaurs.
Yeah. Even the dinosaurs couldn't kill them.
So that's something like I guess that's probably like 30,000 millennia they've been around. Yet, your book points out they could be gone in less than a quarter of a millennia from now, less than 250 years from now.
Oh, right. It's the bigger a species is, the easier it is to wipe it out, because it's their reproduction is so sensitive. Yeah. And we basically wiped out almost all the alligator gar in the state of Arkansas in the 50s, because there was a big sport fishing industry for them. People were coming from around the world to fish for them on rod and reel and bow hunting, and they became a big trophy fish. And between 57 and 8 and 59, basically all the alligator gar in the state were wiped out, except a few, basically. Right. And we've been trying to rebuild the populations ever since.
Yeah. But you're not anti-fishing, because you're catch and release. This, of course, back before catch and release was the 50s. What would they do then? I mean, they would bow hunt for them. Obviously, you can't release a bow fish. But even if they catch them hook and line, what would they do with them?
Oh, they'd just shoot them in the head and throw them on the shore. People weren't really into eating them, although their meat is just fine to eat.
It's good, huh?
Yeah.
You say it's a white, flaky. It's like you'd think of pike or maybe even walleye. Huh?
Well, it's a thick meat. It's really thick. It's sort of like got the density of chicken in a way. I mean, I wouldn't say that it tastes like chicken, but it's thick and it's sort of chewy. But it's a clean white, sort of sweet meat even.
Yeah, you've got some recipes.
Yeah.
In the book for gar balls is what you hear. The ones where you blend them up, with the spices and fry them up. Like you tried that, right?
Oh yeah, cook them all the time.
It's good stuff. Yeah. Let's get back to the real lurid stuff. I mean, the sea monster tales. You go up to the northeast, the biggest, it's not a Great Lake, but it's a huge lake, Lake Champlain up there, and they've got Champ, which is their sea monster. And there is some speculation that this stems from a sighting of a big gar, of a big alligator gar, right?
Right. Well, Champlain, the French explorer, came over in the 1700s, and he was with the Iroquois Indians, and he got to see some of these big fish that were in the system up there. And he wrote about him in his diary. Actually, I think it was like 1609 or something. 1609, so it's the 1600s. And he wrote about the fish. The natives called him the fish Chazaroo, I think. And Champlain drew pictures of the fish and described the fish. And the interesting thing about the fish is that he described is, I mean, it's clearly a gar. You look at the illustration, it is a gar. It's got the same ganoid scale structures and the big teeth. And but he describes the fish as having an upper row of double teeth. And the alligator gar is the only species of gar that has a double row of teeth. So it's really interesting that he saw 400, 500 years ago, saw an alligator gar up in the northeast United States.
Between Vermont and New York.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
and alligator gar basically now are just down in the south. They don't really get up any higher than lower Missouri. I mean, there's other gar species all over the country, but the alligator gar used to, you know, its range used to be as far as Canada, and they have just been extirpated from, you know, 75% of the country basically.
Through fishing, loss of habitat, and so forth, like
exactly.
that. Lake Murray in South Carolina, you said, also has a fish that's, and even Rayburn, right? You said, or is it Sam Rayburn? You said it had a fish tail of a monster fish
yeah.
like that.
Yeah. I mean, wherever you've got alligator gar, you end up with stories of sea monsters. It just happens.
Yeah.
I mean, people see these things splashing around, usually when they're mating, and they create quite a disturbance, and that leads to stories.
Yeah. Oh, stories like, as we know, especially related to fishing.
Right.
Fishing is the one sport where it's sort of a refuge from the truth. I mean, people just like to leave the truth behind, tell stories, and stories get. And I'm sure people will claim they've seen them pull cows off the bank, and like you say, you know, attack people, which is totally spurious. It's not true. It's a falsehood. Although that has not stopped the stories from even being printed in papers through the years, like the Times-Picayune from New Orleans.
Exactly.
And you go through a very painstaking process of debunking most of that, or just pointing out, rightfully so, that there's no real evidence there.
Right.
But it's amazing, and probably would you assume that nowadays that still most people who are familiar with or at least have heard of alligator gar believe that they might attack a person?
I think that people are starting to get an awareness of these, and people are starting to be less afraid. It's slow, it's gradual, but you know, the show River Monsters has done well for the alligator gar. Some of my research went into the alligator gar episode, and at the end, Jeremy Wade.
Well, you were in it, right?
Yeah. And so it's the conclusion of the show is that these fish do not eat people, and they never did. And so, you know, this show gets seen by millions of people all over the world, all the time, reruns. And so that show has done a lot to help the alligator gar's reputation. I think people are still afraid of them, but this isn't a time when there's a lot more science going on. The southern states, the state agencies, the conservation societies, they're all working together right now. The fisheries on alligator gar, there's a lot of science going on, and there's a lot of conservation efforts across the United States right now to protect these fish and preserve them.
Yeah, there's a whole chapter in the book. We're talking here with Mark Spitzer about his book, Season of the Gar here, and a whole chapter in the book dedicated to that experience you had with the crew of the River Monsters show down there fishing in Texas. And the funny thing that struck me was that the host comes down and he asks you, he says, I understand you've got a mammal that you're going to tie on, and we're going to fish with an actual mammal. And you said, what?
Yeah, well, they told me to bring the bait for this show, and so I went to Lone Oak and I went to the ponds and I got all sorts of carp and drum and koi and giant goldfish, and I brought them down there to Texas in the coolers, and I told them about the bait I was bringing, you know, and I talked about the drum. I told them it was sheep's head, which of course is another word for freshwater drum, and they thought that was very interesting, and then so they had me on the camera and they were asking me about this mammal that I had brought for bait, and I didn't know what they were talking about, and then they you know, the sheep's head, and I said, oh, that's a fish, that's not a mammal.
They were really counting on that to be a big visual element in the show there. You that sheep's head, you know, hooking it up and pulling it off the boat. Well, sorry to disappoint them on that one, but it looks like they had a pretty good time anyways. A successful show, and as you say, gets a number of re-airs and so forth like that, so it's getting the word out on them. Another fishing trip, same area with the famous Captain Kirk is a big part of your book too. And the first trip down there to visit with Captain Kirk, is that word for word as it happened, or is there a little bit of writer's embellishment in that part of the book?
Yeah, this book here is, I'm trying, it's a serious book, but I'm also trying to have a fun time also. So you get articles on the science, on the history, on the folklore, but it's interspersed with personal narratives about me going fishing. And, you know, I'm sort of influenced by Hunter S. Thompson, and I'm narrative-wise, and my friend Hippie and I go down to Texas, and we have wild times and stuff like that. Yeah, it's a little embellished, but
it moves right along. I'll tell you, it's a lot of fun.
All right.
It sounds like a trip you'd want to be on for a while. You know, anyway, it's good stuff. This Captain Kirk fellow is he sort of the he's the Jedi master of
he is
of alligator gar fishing. Tell us about his method. How does he go about? How does he get success at that?
Well, he fishes on the Trinity River in Texas, and that river is just the richest, you know, river system full of alligator gar in the world. They're everywhere in there. Big ones, 6, 7, 8 footers all over the place, 5 footers. What he does is he takes, like, he gives you a big old carp, and a giant rod, like you were saying earlier. It's sort of like pool cue, yeah,
or a broomstick.
That's how fat it is, and then it's got a giant pen bait casting reel on it. Basically, what you do is you throw you hook the carp and you throw it into the river. It sinks to just onto the sandy bottom, and then he has these rod holders. He takes you to the shore. You put the rod holder in there. You set the rod there, and there's an alarm system. So what you do is you set a whole bunch of...
Kind of like a tip up for ice fishing, sort of a flag goes up, or a little sound goes off, or something?
You get a beep.
Okay.
You get a high-pitched signal. And so we set up like maybe 6 or 7 of these along the shore, and then we went to the other side of the river, and we waited in the shade for these things to start beeping. We hear something beep. Captain Kirk fires up the boat, and we cruise over across the river, pick up the fishing pole, and then we basically follow the fish downstream, floating. And
you're not trying to make him aware that he's had the bait. You're not trying to set a hook yet or anything.
No.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the number one mistake in gar fishing is people try to set that hook really quick. Yeah. But what the fish will do is it'll go downstream, because that's what it does when it wants to. It's easiest to digest and to swim downstream. And it'll take about 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes for that fish it'll be moving the bait around in its mouth, and you don't really want to set the hook until it swallows the bait.
That's the only time a hook can find tissue that it can get into, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you just follow the fish, and there's a float that marks where the fish is going. And when the float stops, then you stop behind it. You wait a little bit, and then when it starts to take off again, then you know that it's time to set the hook. So you crank back, not just once, like 4 or 5 times. That's how Captain Kirk does it.
Yeah.
And you set the hook, and then it's on, fish on.
How long does it take? I'd say a 6-footer. How long does it take to land a 6-footer?
I caught one that was 6'5", and it took about half an hour to get it in.
Half an hour, and that's hard work too.
Oh, yeah.
Are you straight up and down on the fish, or you got to kind of out off the boat? Like
Usually, the fish will be going downriver, and it's usually ahead of you, and so you gotta crank back with your back, and then when you go forward, you reel in, and so you keep cranking back. When I had my big fish, we were in a giant eddy, and it was actually straight down underneath us.
Work there.
So I had to haul it up.
That's hard. Yeah. That's hard stuff. But it's a great experience. This guy is the best best on earth, and the Trinity River, you say, is the most prolific alligator gar stream, at least in the middle part of America.
Oh,
right?
definitely, yeah.
Or the south. Yeah. How about the rivers in Arkansas? The Arkansas River, the Mississippi, the White River. They're pretty famous for gar too, right?
Yeah, I mean the Arkansas River. We have so many rivers in this state that used to be world-class alligator gar streams. But now the biggest populations are in the Washita River, underneath the Felsenthal Dam, in that area. But the largest population in the state is right next door to Conway here, over by the Arkansas River, over by the Toadsuck Dam, Pool 7, which goes from the Toadsuck Dam basically down to Mayflower. That area we know has the largest population in the state. There's one tributary there that has 75 to 100 alligator gar in it. These are all old alligator gars, nothing under 5.5 feet. And then, but there are populations out in the river also that live there full time, and there's hundreds more in that, and there's hundreds more upstream in Pool 8 between Toadsuck Dam and Morrilton. Though that area, biologists and U.S. Fish and Wildlife and Game and Fish here are still trying to get a handle on.
Good count of the population,
right,
I mean, stuff
yeah.
like that, yeah. Now, as far as regulations, I mean, now I assume they're all enlightened. Most of the wildlife and fish management agencies
Right.
are enlightened about it. Nobody encourages overtaking them, and probably
Right.
are they dialing back the limits or the
Yeah, we just had here in 2010, we had a new package of alligator gar laws passed in the state. It used to be that you could take 2 per day, which was highly unlikely anyways, but now the limit is down to 1 per day, provided you have the free alligator gar permit that you can get off the Game and Fish Commission website.
And how many permits can you get in a year's time? Can you get one or,
You can get
multiple?
You can get 1 per year.
Okay.
Yeah. So and that allows you to catch 1 alligator gar per day, except during spawning season, which is May and June. During those 2 months, any alligator gar over 36 inches is off limits.
Your fascination with gar is so vivid in the book. You live and breathe gar, and you have a lot of other interests as well. And we got to talk about them also. You are the managing editor in chief of a literary compendium called the Toadsuck Review, which is the sort of the son of a very famous one called The Exquisite Corpse.
Right.
I know a lot of our viewers are also listeners to National Public Radio. You'd hear about an essay every week at one point in time from the old editor of The Exquisite, it was Andrei Kodrescu. And you have taken that over, and it's an annually published thing, and this takes a lot of your time, I would imagine.
Yeah, we published this out of the Department of Writing here at UCA. The Toadsuck Review, it evolved from the Exquisite Corpse Annual. I've got a picture of a giant alligator gar here on the cover.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, because I love that picture. So this is our first issue. We're working on our second issue. It takes a lot of work. I have to solicit some work, but we've got other editors on it also, and we're trying to make a literary name for this area of Central Arkansas.
Absolutely. Of course, you work on that with your job at the University of Central Arkansas, where you teach. There is a writing department that you sort of are involved in, and the creation and maintenance of, and so forth. And you write a lot. You've written a lot of books, and not just on gar. A lot of it stemming from an experience you had in France, going over and working at the famous which bookstore? The Shakespeare.
Yeah, Shakespeare and Company bookstore in Paris. Yeah,
being a writer in residence there, and
I lived there between 1993 and 1996. I went over there to translate some French poetry that I had to do, and I had to do for myself. I wanted to do it, and I ended up at that bookstore and just living there for 3 years, rent-free. My job was to just translate French authors. So when I got done translating that poet, I went on to another, and I just did it for 3 years.
Oh man, would you go back? Would you do it again? Or
once
enough.
You lived with bed bugs and fleas and thieves, and it was sort of an erratic nature over there. And I don't, I'm not adolescent anymore. I mean, I was in my 20s at that time, but it felt like I was an adolescent.
Yeah, it's a little more of a romantic notion back then to do something.
Yeah, I want clean sheets now and TV at night.
Right, and time to spend on gar fishing and so forth. We'd like you to wrap this up. Read us an excerpt from it. The parts we were talking about, the sort of Gonzo-esque fishing trips that you were on. You got a copy of it? Or 71 is the page, and it's a really great little fishing episode in there. And
Yeah, this is when I caught my first huge gar with Captain Kirk on the Trinity River. Suddenly the line went taut, so I lowered the rod, then hauled back, jerking it as hard as I could. And somewhere leagues beneath us, I felt my distant hook sink into a mass of meat. "Set it again," Captain Kirk shouted, so I set it again. Then he yelled it 4 more times, so I set the hook 4 more times. And each time I did it, it made a run, spinning the drag on that oversized reel. "She's a big one," Captain Kirk said. For every 20 yards I'd reel in, it took another 30 out. But what was I going to do? Lay down my pole and give up? No way. I kept on raising that rod, then reeling in as I lowered it, while 2 old boys in a flat-bottomed boat fished for catfish on the far bank. After 25 minutes, I finally got it under the boat, and then it passed right under us, and kept passing under us. Even Captain Kirk whistled in awe. That thing was at least 6 feet long and as thick around as a kayak, with scales the size of dominoes. Then I saw an eyeball turn. It saw us, went wide, and that gar shot off like a shoplifter, taking out another 30 yards. I hauled back and hauled back while Hippie and Kirk kept yelling stuff. My back was starting to ache, my arms were getting tired, and I didn't think it possible, because this was the mythical big one, so there was no way I could ever get it in the boat. It was destined to bust the line, bend the hook, and take off like the rest, leaving me someone who always gets close but no cigar. Then I got it alongside again. "You stupid," Captain Kirk said to the gar, "you're hooked by a hair." The treble was lodged in one of the gills, one tiny barb connecting 2 creatures, one just under 200 pounds and the other at least half of that. Then the gar shot off again. But I yanked it in and saw it, and it saw us again, so shot off again, and that's how it went for another 10 minutes, until it was tired out enough for Captain Kirk to slip a rope around its head. "The stupid hook is caught in the stupid rope," he yelled. Hearing this, the garfish rolled, tore the rope right out of his hand, and shot off again for another run. But I brought it back, and the rope was still hooked by the hook, which the captain grabbed and began to untangle. Then he did some jimmy rigging, wrangled a noose on the other end, and slipped it over its head. He got the rope under the pectoral fins, pulled it tight, and using 1 foot to hold the rope to the flat of the boat, yanked that gar head out of the drink. Then twisting the hook out of its gill, he threw all his weight into his shoulders, pulling that thing right into the boat. Meanwhile, the cat fisherman watched on agape.
I read a lot of fish and writing, and that's good fishing writing, right?
All right.
Mark Spitzer, thank you so much. The Season of the Gar is the name of the book. Thanks for being with us on the Same Page.
Thank you, Tommy.